Audrey Mark sat quietly near the window of the city bus, watching the blur of buildings glide past. At 28, she was the CEO of a fast-growing tech company worth millions, yet she still preferred public transport to fancy cars. Her co-workers found it odd, her parents found it embarrassing, but Audrey found it peaceful. The bus was her thinking space. No chauffeurs, no bodyguards, no pretense. Just people living their lives. A little girl offered her a candy with a shy smile, and Audrey chuckled softly. No one around her would ever guess that the woman in plain jeans and a white blouse was one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the city. Simplicity wasn't her disguise. It was her choice. Her parents, Thomas and Eleanor Mark, never fully understood that choice. They were symbols of old wealth and new ambition, owners of estates, art collections, and connections that stretched across New York. Every year, the Marks hosted an elegant family dinner, and every year, Audrey arrived underdressed by their standards. "You could at least try to look successful," Eleanor would sigh, offering her a designer dress. Audrey would smile and reply, "Success doesn't need decoration, Mom." Her cousins, especially Richard, loved to mock her for it. "Still taking the bus to work?" He'd laugh across the table. Audrey would simply sip her drink and let him talk. But this year would be different. One simple item on her wrist would silence them all before the night was over. As her Uber rolled through the long iron gates of her parents' mansion, Audrey's mind drifted to Gerald Klein, the man who changed how she saw success. He had been her mentor, her guide, and the reason she built her company the way she did. Gerald always said, "True wealth is invisible, Audrey. The moment you need to prove your worth, you've already lost it." He had lived that truth, a billionaire who drove an old car and wore the same sweater for years. When he passed away, he left Audrey something deeply personal, a hand-crafted watch from his private collection. Not flashy, not diamond-encrusted, but priceless for what it symbolized: patience, craftsmanship, and legacy. That same watch gleamed faintly on Audrey's wrist as she stepped out of the Uber and approached the grand marble staircase of her family home. The driveway sparkled with luxury cars, Ferraris, Bentleys, and a Rolls-Royce she didn't recognize. The Uber driver gave a low whistle. "Nice place," he said. Audrey smiled. "It belongs to my parents." Inside, laughter echoed through the vast hall. "Audrey," her mother called out, her tone mixing surprise and subtle disapproval. "You didn't wear the dress I sent you." Audrey hugged her lightly. "This one's more comfortable, Mom." Her father, Thomas, walked over with a proud smile. "Glad you made it, kiddo. I read about your company's new government contract. You're making waves." Audrey's face softened. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." Dinner had already begun when Audrey joined the long, candlelit table. Conversations buzzed like static. Richard, seated across from her, smirked immediately. "Still taking the bus, cousin?" he teased, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few polite laughs followed. Audrey raised her glass calmly. "Of course. It's efficient." Richard grinned, ready to deliver another jab, but something stopped him. Thomas's gaze had frozen on Audrey's wrist. "Audrey," he said slowly, his tone suddenly serious. "Is that what I think it is?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Audrey looked down at the elegant, old-fashioned watch. "Oh, this. It was Gerald's," she said casually. Her father leaned forward, his eyes wide. "That's a Gerald Klein original, one of only 50 ever made." For a moment the room froze. Forks hovered in midair. Even Richard's smirk faltered. "Only 50. And Pamela gasped. Thomas nodded slowly. Gerald Klein made them himself before he entered the tech world. Each piece was hand-built, a masterpiece. He looked back at Audrey, his voice softer now. "How did you get this?" Audrey rested her wrist on the table. "He gave it to me," she said simply. "Before he passed away." Richard frowned, confused. "Wait, you knew that Gerald Klein? The billionaire who sold his company to Google?" Audrey nodded. "He was my mentor." Gasps rippled around the table. followed by stunned silence. For the first time all evening, Audrey wasn't the quiet one being underestimated. She was the one everyone suddenly wanted to understand. Her father's eyes softened with recognition. "You told me he advised your startup years ago. I didn't realize it was that serious." Audrey smiled faintly. "He believed in me before anyone else did. He was my first investor. $500,000 on a handshake." Uncle Roger leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "No contract." Audrey shook her head. He said, "I'm investing in you, not your pitch deck." The table murmured. Even her mother looked taken aback. "And what did you do with that money?" Eleanor asked carefully. "Built something real," Audrey said. "A company that helps small businesses compete with big ones. Data analytics, automation and strategy tools." Richard tilted his head, curiosity replacing arrogance. "And it worked." Audrey met his eyes calmly. "Well enough to reach a $1.8 billion valuation." The sound that followed was collective disbelief. Silverware clinked against plates. Madison, one of her younger cousins, whispered, "Did she just say billion?" Uncle Roger blinked. "That can't be right. You're saying your company's worth nearly $2 billion. Audrey nodded. "After our last funding round, yes." Eleanor blinked rapidly, torn between pride and confusion. "But, sweetheart, you still live in that tiny apartment in the city. And you take the bus." Audrey laughed softly. "I like my apartment. It's close to the office. And yes, the bus is still faster than traffic." Thomas smiled faintly, admiration flickering in his eyes. "Gerald would have been proud," he said quietly. "He lived the same way, modestly, deliberately." "Exactly," Audrey agreed. "He taught me that wealth isn't meant to show off. It's meant to serve." Across the table, Richard's earlier smirk was gone. He cleared his throat. "So, you're really saying you could buy every car in this driveway and not blink?" Audrey gave him a teasing look. "I could, but why would I? They just sit there and collect dust." That earned a few nervous laughs. "But why keep it secret?" Amber asked, eyes wide. "If I had your success, I'd tell everyone." Audrey took a sip of her water before replying. "Because true success doesn't need applause. Needs purpose. I want to be known for what I build, not for what I buy." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "Klein's philosophy," he murmured. "Impact over image." "Exactly," Audrey said. "And it's the reason I named my company after him. Klein Dynamics." The energy in the room had shifted entirely. Moments ago, they'd seen her as the modest cousin with nothing to show. Now, she was the quiet powerhouse who'd surpassed them all. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, pride finally breaking through her composure. "You remind me of your grandfather," she whispered. "He believed in building things that last." Audrey smiled gently. "Gerald said something similar. He told me, don't build a company to be seen. Build it to make a difference." Thomas leaned back, watching her closely, a mix of admiration and realization in his gaze. For years, he'd wondered why his daughter avoided the spotlight. Tonight he finally understood. The watch on her wrist wasn't just a timepiece. It was a symbol, a quiet declaration that true worth never needs to shine to be seen. Dinner resumed, but the air felt entirely different now. The laughter was quieter, the conversations slower, more cautious. Audrey's father asked about her next projects, while her mother listened intently, clearly trying to catch up on everything she had missed. "We're expanding into Europe next quarter," Audrey explained. "Our London office opens in April." "You're managing all that yourself?" Thomas asked. "With a great team," Audrey replied. "We've grown to over 200 employees." Around the table, heads turned in disbelief. Richard stared at her, the realization settling in that his once dismissed cousin had quietly built an empire. "You're serious," he muttered under his breath. Audrey smiled, calm and composed. "Completely." Eleanor broke the silence first. You know, darling, I may not fully understand your world, but I am proud of what you've done. Truly. Audrey reached across and squeezed her mother's hand. Thanks, Mom. The gesture softened the tension, and even Uncle Roger chuckled. Well, I suppose we can all stop worrying about Audrey finding a stable job, he joked, earning scattered laughter. Richard forced a grin but said nothing. He was lost in thought, swirling his wine slowly. Across the table, Amber leaned closer to Madison and whispered, I think we've underestimated her. Madison nodded, her eyes still fixed on the watch that had changed everything. Audrey could feel their gazes, but she stayed present, listening to her father as he discussed her company's impact. Thomas leaned forward, his voice thoughtful. Your housing initiative, that was mentioned in the Times last month, wasn't it? Audrey nodded. Yes, we launched a partnership with several nonprofits. Our system helps connect low-income families to affordable housing more efficiently. It's one of the projects I'm proudest of. Thomas smiled. Your grandfather would have loved that. He never forgot his roots, even when he made his fortune. I remember, Audrey said softly. He used to say, if your success doesn't lift others, it's incomplete. The table went quiet again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was respectful. For the first time in years, the Mark family was talking about purpose instead of possessions. As dessert was served, the conversations turned more genuine. Aunt Pamela, who had spent most of her life chasing social validation, looked at Audrey with visible curiosity. So tell us, dear, she began carefully, what drives you to live so simply when you could afford anything? Audrey smiled, choosing her words with care. Because simplicity gives me freedom. The fewer things I own, the less I'm owned by them. Pamela blinked, caught off guard by the depth of her response. But don't you ever want more? She asked. I already have more than enough, Audrey replied warmly. And besides, there's peace in knowing you don't have to prove anything. Thomas raised his glass slightly. To peace then, he said. And to living on your own terms. Richard's voice cut in, quieter this time. You really mean all this, don't you? You're not just saying it because it sounds noble. Audrey turned to him, her tone gentle. I mean every word. Gerald taught me that real wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you give. He nodded slowly, staring into his glass. I used to think the car I drove or the suit I wore defined me, he admitted. Now I'm starting to wonder if I've been chasing the wrong things. Audrey smiled softly. It's never too late to change direction, Richard. We all grow at different times. For the first time that night, his smile reached his eyes. Maybe you can teach me a few things, he said quietly. After dinner, the family moved into the grand library for drinks. The room glowed with amber light reflecting off leather-bound books and old portraits. Audrey found herself beside her father again. You've given them something to think about tonight, Thomas said, handing her a glass of water. That wasn't my goal, she replied. I just wanted to be treated like a person, not a curiosity. He nodded slowly. People fear what they don't understand, and they envy what they can't match. But tonight you didn't boast or defend yourself. You just showed them. Audrey smiled. Gerald always said, the quietest truth speaks the loudest. Thomas chuckled. Smart man. I wish I'd known him better. You would have liked him, she said. He was a lot like you, only with fewer suits. Thomas laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Touché, he said. Maybe I could learn from him too. He took a slow sip, then turned serious. I'm proud of you, Audrey. Not just for the company but for the person you've become. You built all this without shortcuts, without family money. You earned it. Audrey felt her throat tighten slightly. Thanks, Dad. That means more than you know. You've reminded me of something I'd forgotten, he added quietly. That real success doesn't always come with headlines. She smiled. It doesn't need to. Their shared silence said everything. A quiet acknowledgement of respect, long overdue between father and daughter. Across the room, Richard approached with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Mind if I join you both?" he asked cautiously. Thomas gestured toward the seat beside Audrey. "Of course, Richard. Sit." Richard sat down, his earlier confidence replaced by humility. "I owe you both an apology," he began. "Especially you, Audrey. I've been shallow, judgmental, maybe even jealous." Audrey shook her head gently. "We've all been guilty of judging people too quickly. What matters is what we learn afterward." Richard nodded. "I thought wealth was measured in noise. The flashier you were, the richer you seemed. But tonight, I learned quiet confidence speaks louder than any Ferrari." Thomas smiled approvingly. "That's a lesson worth keeping." For the first time in years, there was no competition in Richard's tone, no mocking edge, just sincerity. "You've built something incredible, Audrey," he said. "And you've done it without losing yourself. I respect that." Audrey looked at him, her eyes soft. "That's all I ever wanted, to be respected for who I am, not for what I own." "Consider it done," Richard said, lifting his glass. "To Audrey, the real success story of this family." Thomas joined the toast. "To Audrey," he repeated, pride glinting in his eyes. Audrey lifted her glass, smiling modestly. "To all of us," she said. "Because success isn't a competition. It's a reflection of what we contribute." Later that evening, as the guests began to leave, Eleanor approached Audrey near the staircase. "I hope you know I only ever wanted what's best for you," she said softly. "I just thought, maybe you were missing out." Audrey smiled kindly. "I know, Mom. You wanted me to fit into this world, but I was trying to build my own." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "You've done more than that. You've built something meaningful." She hugged her daughter tightly, holding her for a long moment. "Your father and I are proud of you," she whispered. "Even if you do take the bus." Audrey laughed gently against her shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom. I might upgrade to the subway next week." Eleanor smiled through tears. "Still my stubborn girl." When the last car disappeared down the long driveway, the mansion grew quiet. Audrey stood for a moment on the balcony, breathing in the cool night air. The stars shimmered faintly over the estate, and she found herself smiling. What had started as another tense family dinner had turned into something transformative. Her father joined her, holding 2 cups of tea instead of champagne. "You handled yourself beautifully," he said. "You didn't need to prove anything, but somehow you taught them more in one evening than I've managed in years." Audrey accepted the cup, her smile calm. "Gerald used to say lessons land best when you don't force them." Thomas chuckled. "Then you've mastered his philosophy." They stood in companionable silence, watching the lights fade in the distance. The following morning, Audrey was back in the city, dressed in her usual jeans and white blouse, waiting for the bus. A businessman beside her glanced at his expensive watch, then at hers. He didn't recognize it, and that was the point. When the bus arrived, Audrey climbed aboard, smiled at the driver, and took her usual window seat. She pulled out her tablet to review notes for an upcoming investor meeting. Across the aisle, an elderly woman was trying to read a digital flyer about a job program. Audrey leaned forward to help her. "Here, let me enlarge that for you," she said. The woman thanked her warmly. Moments like that grounded Audrey. Small, ordinary acts that reminded her of why she built her platform in the first place. By mid-morning, she was in her office, a bright, minimalist space overlooking Madison Avenue. The logo of Klein Dynamics glowed subtly on the wall behind her desk. Her assistant, Chloe, entered with a smile. "Morning, Audrey. Your dad's here." Audrey blinked. "My dad?" "Yes, he said he wanted the full tour," Chloe grinned. "He's talking to the developers right now." Audrey laughed softly. "Of course he is." She walked down the glass hallway and found Thomas standing among a group of young engineers, listening intently as they explained a new feature. "So this algorithm predicts consumer behavior?" he asked. One developer nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. It helps small stores stock smarter and waste less." Thomas looked genuinely impressed. Remarkable. Dad, Audrey said with a laugh, approaching. He turned, his face lighting up. You didn't tell me you built all this, he said, gesturing around the modern workspace filled with screens and quiet focus. I thought it was just a small tech office. This feels like the future. Audrey smiled. It's grown faster than I expected. But every person here believes in the mission. That's what makes it work. Thomas nodded approvingly. You've built culture, not just a company. He spent the next hour asking questions, shaking hands and talking with staff members. Several of them later whispered to Audrey, "Your dad's amazing. He treats everyone like equals." She smiled. Now you know where I got it from. After the tour, they stood by the large window overlooking the skyline. You've done something special here, Thomas said. It's not just business, it's purpose. Audrey folded her arms lightly. That's what Gerald wanted. He believed the best companies solve real problems. Thomas nodded. And your foundation? You said it's helping students learn tech skills? Audrey's eyes brightened. Yes, the Klein Foundation for Technological Equity. We provide free education, mentorship, and internships to students from underprivileged backgrounds. Our first group is already halfway through their program. Thomas looked thoughtful. You're giving others the kind of chance Gerald gave you. Exactly, Audrey said softly. That's how I honor him. A week later, Audrey received a call from her father early in the morning. I've been thinking, he said, about your foundation. Audrey smiled, sipping her coffee. Oh, that sounds dangerous. He laughed. I want to be part of it, not just financially. I have experience in business and leadership that could help those students. If you'll have me, I'd like to mentor a few. Audrey was touched. I'd love that, Dad. They'd be lucky to learn from you. And maybe, he added with a chuckle, I'll learn something from them too. Audrey hung up smiling. For the first time, her father wasn't just proud of her success. He wanted to join her mission. News of her foundation's work began spreading. A business magazine ran an article titled, "The Quiet Billionaire Redefining Success." Audrey almost didn't agree to the interview, but when the reporter promised to focus on impact rather than wealth, she accepted. During the session, she spoke about Gerald, her company, and her belief that success should serve society. You live in a modest apartment and still take public transport, the reporter said, half incredulous. Why? Audrey smiled. Because comfort doesn't come from luxury. It comes from purpose. The quote went viral overnight. Thousands of comments poured in, people thanking her for proving that humility and success could coexist. Audrey didn't chase fame, but this time it found her. A few days later, Richard sent her a text. You've inspired me. I've started volunteering at a youth tech camp. Turns out I actually like teaching. Audrey laughed aloud reading it. She replied, proud of you. That's how it starts. One person, one moment. Later that evening, her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother. I just saw your interview, Eleanor said, her voice softer than usual. I still don't understand why you choose to live so simply. But I admire it. You found peace in a way most of us haven't. Audrey smiled. Thanks, Mom. Maybe simplicity isn't about less. Maybe it's just about having enough. Eleanor paused. That's beautifully said, dear. Weeks passed, and Audrey's schedule grew busier. She spent her mornings with clients, her afternoons at the foundation, and her evenings mentoring new entrepreneurs. Despite her fame, she remained grounded. One afternoon, while riding the bus home, a teenage girl sitting nearby tapped her shoulder shyly. Excuse me, the girl said. Are you Audrey Mark? Audrey smiled. Yes, I am. I read about you in Business Daily. You said you don't need to show success to have it. Audrey nodded. That's right. The girl grinned. That helped me stop comparing myself to others. I want to build my own tech company one day. Audrey felt her heart swell. Then promise me one thing, she said. Build it with purpose, not pressure. The girl nodded earnestly. I will. That night, Audrey returned to her apartment, dropped her bag by the door, and walked to the small window overlooking the city lights. Her reflection shimmered faintly against the glass. Simple clothes, tired eyes, and Gerald's watch still ticking softly on her wrist. She traced its surface with her fingers and smiled. "Still with me, old friend," she whispered. The watch had seen boardrooms, battles, and breakthroughs. It had silenced arrogance, healed pride, and reconnected a family. But most of all, it reminded Audrey that the world's truest treasures aren't worn for attention. They're carried quietly, close to the heart. As the city hummed below, she whispered Gerald's words once more. "True wealth is invisible." Then she smiled, knowing she was living proof. Months passed, and Audrey's life moved in a rhythm that felt balanced for the first time in years. Her days were full but purposeful. Client dynamics continued to expand, not just in profit but in impact. Small businesses across the country were thriving using her platform, and the foundation's second batch of students had just been selected. One morning, while reviewing applications, Audrey paused at a name: Zoe Mitchell, a 16-year-old who wanted to use data to fight food insecurity. Audrey smiled at the determination in her essay. "Let's bring her in," she told Chloe. "I want to meet her personally." Gerald had once believed in her without hesitation. Now it was her turn to pass that same belief forward. Zoe arrived 2 days later, nervous but eager, clutching a worn notebook filled with sketches and ideas. "Miss Mark, thank you for seeing me," she said shyly. Audrey smiled warmly. "Just Audrey, please. Tell me about your idea." Zoe spoke passionately about mapping food deserts and creating delivery systems to get fresh produce into low-income neighborhoods. As she talked, Audrey saw the same fire she once had in her early days, that relentless drive to solve a problem bigger than herself. When Zoe finished, Audrey leaned forward. "How would you feel about working with our data science team 1 day a week?" Zoe's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Audrey said. "We'll pay you a stipend and give you full access to our tools." Zoe's face lit up. That would change everything. After Zoe left, Audrey sat at her desk, still smiling. She picked up her phone and called her father. "Dad, I think I just met someone who reminds me of myself at 16. "That's a good sign," he said cheerfully. "How's the program going?" "Better than I imagined," Audrey replied. "Zoe's joining as our first direct mentee." Thomas sounded genuinely impressed. "You're building leaders now, not just products." Audrey nodded softly. That's what Gerald always wanted, to teach people how to build their own doors when the world refuses to open one. Her father's voice grew thoughtful. "You've made his legacy your own, Audrey. I hope you know that." She smiled, glancing at the watch. "I do now." A few months later, Klein Dynamics hosted its first community innovation fair. Hundreds of students, small business owners, and mentors filled the bright convention space. Thomas gave the opening speech, his voice steady and full of pride. "My daughter taught me something I wish I had learned earlier," he told the crowd. "That true success isn't measured by what you own, but by what you build for others." The audience erupted in applause, and Audrey felt tears prick her eyes. When she took the stage after him, she looked out at the crowd, faces of all colors, ages, and backgrounds, and said, "This is what happens when we stop chasing status and start chasing solutions." After the event, reporters surrounded her, eager for sound bites. "Audrey, how does it feel to lead one of the fastest-growing companies in the country?" one asked. She smiled modestly. "Grateful. But titles and valuations fade. What matters are the people standing here. Innovators, dreamers, students, mentors. That's the real legacy." Another reporter raised his microphone. "Is it true you still live in a 1-bedroom apartment?" Audrey chuckled. "Yes, and I still take the bus sometimes." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but her words carried deeper meaning. "You don't need luxury to live a rich life," she added. "You just need purpose." That line made the next day's headlines. Richard was at the fair too, helping lead a session on financial literacy for teens. Afterward, he found Audrey backstage. "You know," he said with a grin, "if someone told me a year ago I'd be teaching kids instead of bragging about cars, I'd have laughed." Audrey laughed with him. "And now it feels right," he said sincerely. "I finally get what you meant about impact." She nudged him playfully. "Took you long enough." "Better late than never," he replied, smiling. The two cousins, once distant, now shared the kind of bond built on respect, something no amount of wealth could buy. That evening, after everyone had gone, Audrey and her father sat together on the stage, watching staff clean up. "You've changed this family," Thomas said quietly. "You've reminded us what our name should stand for." Audrey smiled. "It's not about me, Dad. It's about remembering that success means service." He nodded. "You're right. I see that now." After a pause, he added, "Your mother's been asking when she can volunteer with the foundation. Apparently, she wants to run the scholarship gala." Audrey laughed warmly. "Of course she does. She'll make it the most elegant event in history." "She's proud of you, you know," he said softly. "More than she can put into words." Audrey's heart warmed. "That means everything." Later that night, Audrey rode home in a quiet cab. The city lights sparkled like stars, and for a moment she felt Gerald's presence beside her. His calm, reassuring energy. She touched the watch on her wrist, remembering his voice. "True wealth is invisible." She smiled, whispering back, "And yet it shines through people." When she arrived home, her phone buzzed. A message from Zoe. "I ran the model we discussed. It works. We can predict food shortages 2 weeks earlier than before." Audrey's heart swelled with pride. "That's incredible, Zoe," she replied. "Keep going. You're changing lives already." She set the phone down, overwhelmed by quiet joy. As she prepared for bed, Audrey looked around her modest apartment. Her plants, her books, her view of the skyline. There was no art worth millions on her walls, no marble floors or chandeliers. But there was warmth, simplicity, and purpose. She thought about her journey, from the nervous young graduate turning down a corporate job to the woman who had built something far more meaningful than wealth. The watch ticked softly, steady and sure, marking not just time but transformation. She whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Gerald, for showing me the way." Outside, the city buzzed, a symphony of lives in motion, each chasing their own idea of success. The next morning, Audrey stood once more at the bus stop, sunlight streaming through the trees. A young man beside her was reading an article on his phone about her foundation. He glanced at her briefly, unaware she was the woman in the story. Audrey smiled quietly and boarded the bus when it arrived. As she sat by the window, she caught her reflection in the glass. Calm, grounded, and content. The world had changed around her, but she remained the same, a woman defined not by wealth but by worth. And as the bus rolled forward through the waking city, she whispered one final thought to herself, the words that had guided her all along. The richest life is the one lived with purpose.